Welcome to Stand Up for Doctors. I'm your host, Kim Downey. Thank you very much for joining us. This channel is dedicated to amplifying the voices of doctors, other healthcare professionals, and patients as they share their unique struggles, triumphs, and passions. My mission is to build connection and create advocacy for healthy doctors, driving positive change that benefits both doctors and patients. This is a space for everyone who cares about the future of healthcare. If you appreciate this content, please like and subscribe now. It really helps the episodes reach our target audience. And I would like to welcome back Dr. Kemia Sarraf and Dr. Michael Hersh. Thanks for joining us today, Kemia and Michael.
I was wondering if we were going to do this better than the first time we did this. And so I'm going to jump right in and say thank you, Kim, so much for having us back. It's great to be here. I'm so grateful for this conversation.
Same, same, same. Thanks,
Okay.
Michael. Happy to be here, Kim.
Okay, you're very welcome. And by way of introduction, Dr. Kemia Sarraf is a physician, public health professional, leadership development specialist, keynote speaker, CEO and faculty director, and adjunct faculty at SIU School of Medicine. And Dr. Michael Hersh is a full-time practicing gastroenterologist and the founder and CEO at Better Physician Life Coaching. He's a trauma-informed professional coach. And like I said last time, he's my coach and he's totally awesome. I'll keep that in there because it's 100% true. And we just had an episode where we discussed how Kemia founded Lodestar in 2016, responding to a growing need for trauma mitigation coaching methods for physician colleagues who were reporting high levels of severe burnout, vicarious trauma, and moral injury. And I shared that in my speaking with countless physicians, trauma has been coming up, and it's one of my critical focuses this year to assure that physicians are able to connect with the resources they need. And we discussed Lodestar in a general way and the critical work that Michael and Kemia are doing with Lodestar. And I thought for this episode, we could dive specifically more into how Lodestar is truly helping physicians with stories. And I say so many times that every time a doctor shares their story, another doctor feels less alone. And I feel like if we share some stories that doctors might more relate this work to themselves and how it might benefit them. And I know sometimes it helps when we, share our own story. So Kemia doesn't really know me. So if I was going to share just the briefest part of my own story is I'm a pediatric physical therapist by training, and I had cancer 3 times in recent years and a complication unintended from my first surgery. And I went through 2 years of constant, medical issues and tests and scans. And what I finally thought was going to be a routine visit in the fall of 2022 to see my radiologist. I showed up and he wasn't there. And when I asked where he was, they said he died a month ago. And I said, what happened? I couldn't believe it. And they said the family didn't know. And in that moment, I knew that he had taken his own life. And I felt a calling to support doctors. So that's why I'm doing this work. And that's how I found Michael. I had been following his blog since the spring. It showed up randomly on my Facebook feed. And a couple months afterwards, he was celebrating his year of blogging. And I reached out to him in a private Facebook message to congratulate him and tell him how much his post meant to me. And we continued communicating. And then I asked him if I could tell him the story of my doctor because I didn't know how to feel better. And we had a conversation that was New Year's Eve morning of 2022. And then we kept communicating, and then that's how he became my coach. And when you just shared in the last episode about, what is trauma and how it's subjective, and do you call it trauma? Do you call it an injury? And how it relates to your available resources. And I felt like that really, explained some things for me because I too, as a medical professional over the years, had to deal with, you'd say trauma, right? You walk into one room, you're expected to see your patient, you find out they died, then you have to go into the next room, just the way doctors share their stories as a physical therapist. And I was on the ambulance corps before that. And you show up, you're doing CPR, the patient doesn't make it, but then you have to get right back on the rig, right, and go to the next call. So since I was 16 years old, I've dealt with these things. And then I had a couple miscarriages. I watched my dad take his own breath. And I guess I felt that I handled those things in more of like a typical way. Not that there's typical or atypical, but I went through what I'd feel like is a maybe a typical experience of grief or trauma. And then I felt like I could kept getting back to my regular self or my regular life. But this time that didn't really happen. And I feel like it's probably related to what you were saying because it was one thing after another. Because I kept thinking one more thing and then I'll be done. Because every time I went to a doctor, it was something else, and I needed another test or scan. They sent me to an orthologist and for a kidney scan that found a spot on my liver, and I needed a liver MRI, and it was one more thing and one more thing. And I felt like it was when after 2 years when I finally thought, okay, they're not going to find anything now. And then it was the biggest blow. And by then, I guess I didn't have the resources, specifically what you're saying. And that's what Michael has helped me process and accept so many things. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so I'm incredibly grateful to Michael. So I thought to give you that background for me, and then we'll let Michael go first this time. And I haven't really told you much that you can't share. You would know what that is. So if you want to, speak anything to that, or how have you been able to use coaching to help me, and if you want to share a story, either of your own or of a physician coach that you've helped, and then Kemia can respond.
Well, you know, it's the fascinating thing about these experiences is that and Kimia talks about this a lot when she does her trainings. Trauma doesn't come back as a memory, it comes back as a response. And a lot of times we are completely unaware of why we are showing up in the way that we're showing up because we're not always aware of these things that are going on in the background. Um, Most of us, I can only speak for myself, don't sit around, thinking about how well resourced we are at a time when something hits us like a ton of bricks, right? We are just under the bricks trying to figure out how to get out from under them. And so, um, and I think, your experience, Kim, is unique. And we all have that experience where something just hits us in a different way at I'll just name the wrong time when we are under resourced and we just experience it in a way that is so hard challenging and hard to explain and hard to see our way out of. um and I think to your other point is that physicians are trained, deal with horrible thing in this room and then walk out of the room, walk into the next room, put a smile back on our face and just do it. And yes, like that's our job. And going back and at some point talking about processing, and I learned this from Kemia and probably in that podcast episode that we were referencing in the last episode, how incredibly important it is to go back and reevaluate. And just the last thing I'll say, and then I'll pass the mic, is that in that conversation, that very, very first conversation with Kemia, um, she was kind of talking about this processing of trauma. And all of these real life experiences from my medical training came flooding back to me. And one in particular of a relatively young parent um, dying in the ICU with his young children, his teenage children, standing at the door of the room. Um, that memory will sit with me forever. And I didn't really think about it or even attempt to process it until that conversation. And so these experiences happen, and most of the time we just try to tuck them away, push them down, and there's so much benefit to going back and at least just recognizing them. Even if you don't do anything with it, just knowing that they exist.
Mhm. Go ahead, Kemia.
It's right because this is a whole lot. right? Kim, thank you. Because that is a whole lot of story that you distilled into a very brief retell. And as we know, there's a lot more packed into that than you were able to say in that short period of time. And Michael, that is you pulled forward. You talk about pulling stuff out of people. You pulled a few memories for me out of residency as well. And I'm going to talk about one of them because I think it is actually about resourcing. But before I do that, I want to sort of introduce this concept into the room for listeners, which is that the dose makes the poison. Now, this is something that we learn in pharmacology, right? We learn in medical school. And it ties back to that definition of trauma that we get from Resma Menakem, right? Trauma can be anything that is too much, too fast, too soon, too long. That's the first half of the equation. The second half of the equation is without enough of what would have been resourcing for us, right? So it's not just the thing that happens. It's actually how we experience the thing that happens and how it either becomes embedded in us as harm, as a harmful place, because we're not resourced enough to navigate it well, or right, or it doesn't, because we do feel resourced in a lot of different ways. Resourcing is really important because we are accustomed to thinking about resource as money, as stuff, and it matters. So no one should get confused. I am not arguing money doesn't matter. Of course it does. Of course, let's frame it another way. The absence of money really matters, right? Nothing will compound what might be a non-event faster than the lack of money. I remember getting my car towed. I think I told the story when we were last together. Michael, I remember being 17 or 18, having driven across the country to New York City, not knowing anything because I'm a country bumpkin, parking on the streets, coming back, my car's gone because it's been towed away. And now I gotta walk because I have no money for a cab to wherever it was that they had it, and then they wanted $50. Today that happens. I'm annoyed. I'm dropping whatever language and it's not that stressful, right? Or it just lands as stress. Then I had no resources. I had no money. I had no cash. I had no idea where I was. That landed as intensely stressful, right? Okay. So this is really important because it's all contextualized. And that's really important when we are sitting with another person who is sharing a place of pain. Because if I, as the receiver of that, go, residency wasn't traumatizing, or medical practice wasn't, or moving through a cancer diagnosis wasn't traumatizing to me, Kim, what, right? We have just compounded the harm to the other person. We have just compounded the harm to the other person. And so presencing with someone when they tell us the truth of their lived experience becomes incredibly important. And presencing with them in a way where it doesn't become my harm becomes even more important. Sometimes we talk a lot about building the container for the work, and we also talk a lot about I am not the container, I'm the conduit. Because if I become the container, what I do is I absorb. This is getting to the thing that I heard you say in the beginning. I start to absorb all of that secondary and vicarious trauma. Secondary, so in our last episode, we talked about the fact that the field of study of trauma is relatively new. It's younger than me, which isn't saying much because I'm old, but it is relatively young, right? In the field of study is relatively young and evolving very quickly. And fMRI and the neuroscience is really accelerating the rate at which we understand what happens to us. But what we understand today that, we didn't understand even 15 years ago or 10 years ago very well is not only does the dose make the poison, right? And that's what I heard you say, these small things just continue to add up, right? Not only does the dose make the poison, but we get that dose in a lot of different ways. Primary trauma, those are the traumas that happened to me. Those are easier to identify. Secondary traumas, and there's overlap here. I want to acknowledge the overlap because there's always overlap in the Venn diagram. Secondary traumas are those traumas that are happening to the people closest to me, to my family, to my colleagues, to my patients, to my clients, to my community, to the people I love, that I care for, that I feel responsible for, right? And then there's vicarious trauma, which we define as those traumas that we are maybe 1 or 2 or 10, right? Distanced from. And yet we are reading about, we are seeing, we are hearing in the stories that we consume. Why does this matter? Because when the symptoms of that cumulative exposure start to show up, I cannot differentiate whether they are the symptoms from the primary or the secondary or the vicarious. It shows up in our bodies in the same way. And I'm using body to describe embodied, right? We do not differentiate between mental health and physical health because this doctor thinks that is one of the most harmful paradigms, false paradigms that exist in modern medicine. I love modern medicine, saved my child's life, right? I am a Western trained physician, and that differentiation is profoundly harmful to people. It is profoundly harmful to our colleagues because the stigma around mental health is killing us, is resulting in death by suicide. It is resulting in death by other means. It is resulting in unspeakable harm. I was going somewhere with this. The dose makes the poison. Vicarious traumas are the result of limbic resonance. That is that thing, those mirror neurons that let us connect with one another. Evolutionarily, we are hardwired for that, to co-regulate with one another, to be afraid of the thing the other person is demonstrating fear, right? To take joy in the things that other people. So when someone is revealing to us, telling us, or we are consuming the story of harm done to them, of their trauma, right? It can also become embedded in us. Now, here's where I heard Michael say, yes, and earlier, which is a really powerful mitigator. That's the damn job. It's the damn job. We went into medicine to be present to other humans at their most vulnerable moments. That's the job. And, right, we compartmentalize so we can be present to the job in the moment. Sometimes I joke that if I'm running a code, you do not want me feeling my feelings. You want me running the code. I need to compartmentalize to run the code. And if I have big feelings about what happened as in that code or what the outcome of that code was, and I never have a space where I let that kind of take the armor off or open the compartment to process, to metabolize it, to move it out, what happens is I become the kind of doctor I didn't mean to be. I become the person I didn't mean to be because I start to get, I call it getting crunchy. Like I get armored up and layered away from it. So it's interesting because when we start talking about what is resourcing, I've not told this story before. I don't think I've told the story before, Michael. I was probably a second-year resident, and I had been taking care of a young woman. I was on the 11th floor at the time. I can actually remember where I was sitting. We were both at Barnes different times. I can remember where I was sitting at the nurse's station. I am old enough that everything was handwritten notes. I'm that many old, right? It was all handwritten notes. Anyway, I'd been taking care of this young woman, and she had died. And I was sitting and writing her death note. And I was crying silently, just running down my face. which is a very normal human reaction to the death of someone that you have journeyed with, right? She'd been my patient for a while. And in that moment, I wasn't experiencing that feeling of, oh, I wasn't enough. I just was sad. I was grieving. I was grieving. So tears running down my face as I write quietly. And one of the chief residents, who was a sort of a towering male figure, quite intimidating to all of us, because the chief resident always is intimidating, right? He was quite intimidating and had that reputation to boot. Walked by, did a cold stop, whipped his head back around and said, wasn't quite like that. Are you crying? There's no crying in doctor. It wasn't like that at all. But that's just what popped in my head. He said, what's the matter with you? And I said, oh, I looked up, I said, oh, my patient died. And I will never, it's actually choking me up. I will never forget what he said. Because he stopped and he looked at me and I thought, I remember bracing a little bit, not a lot, just a little like, oh, what's coming? And he says, you're the doctor I'll want someday. Don't ever lose that. Right? How unbelievably permission giving in that moment from someone in a position of power to say, that's okay. And the end result of that permission that I was given in that moment was I became better. I became better at what I did because even though he didn't explicitly say it, I understood the job is this and the job is this. And if you lose the human part of this, you're going to be a lesser. That he said, you're the doctor I want. What? Right? So I was given permission early, young as a baby doctor to hold on to that part of myself. And, right, it did not ever diminish my ability to show up compartmentalized and do the job that needed to be done in the moment it needed to be done. In fact, I would argue it probably made me better able to do that because then I had a place to go move it all out of my system and then come back. Right? Cumulative and compounding. The dose makes the poison. Stress is good for us. The problem is not stress. Sorry, y'all. I know we like to blame the stress. The stress is not the problem. The problem is not even the really, 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 really high stress. The problem is that when that high stress does not have a way to be moved out of us to complete that stress cycle, or when there is never a break in it, when it is compounded over and over and over and over again, then it starts to become embedded in us as harm. Call that harm whatever you want. Call it harm. Call it trauma. The dose makes the poison. Giving it the right name, the right diagnosis, lets us know the treatment plan. And the very, very, very best treatment plan is us. It's really interesting. It's really interesting because what is resourcing are these conversations, are these discussions, is the normalization of the impact of this over time, we sometimes call them the holy words of same, same, same. You're not broken. I've felt that way. I understand. Of co-regulating with each other, right? Of holding space for each other. These are also of normalizing rest and recovery and restoration, right? None of which we do very well. I'm talking to myself right there in case anyone's wondering. That was for me. That one was for me. So these are really important spaces for us to be able to step into. And there's one more type of this, right? Which is the trauma of moral injury. Traumas of moral injury arise from a different place. We talked about primary, secondary, vicarious. Those are the traumas that are coming at us from the inside, from the outside. The traumas of moral injury come up inside of us, right? They arise from a different place. These are the things that we sometimes talk about them as a relational break with self. In the first podcast, we talked about I didn't go into this profession to become this version of who I am. Angry, violent, scalpel chucking. I mean, we've seen and heard it all, right? Clipboard flinging, door slamming, or disengaged, disillusioned, compassion fatigued, or compassion dead, right? When doctors, physicians, healers start talking about that, I don't care. I'm too tired to care. Right? That's a different kind. That is an exhaustion that sleep's not going to fix.
Mhm.
So we have to have the right diagnosis. We have to know that every single one of us, same, every single one of us is susceptible to this. And that the journey back to who we meant to be can involve, and can require very deep therapy and medication. These are life-saving interventions. I am an enormous proponent of them. I am also an enormous proponent of disrupting this before I need the life-saving intervention, which is what we can do with and for each other. The very best thing for a human in distress can be another human. Unfortunately, the very worst thing for a human in distress also is often another human, depending on how we show up for each other.
100%. So just a couple of the things that really stuck out to me about what you said is that you can't differentiate between physical and mental health, and that's harming your colleagues, and that they're both so important. And I know Michael really nodded, that resonated with him. And then also the experience that you had with that resident, I didn't know which way it was going. And when you did say, that he was supportive in that way, I was like, thank God, because I've heard so many stories of the exact opposite. And then how can, especially when you're young and still forming, when you're still in residency, how that can impact and, create internal conflicts for your whole career. So that really was a pivotal moment. Thank you for sharing. So, Michael, anything that you wanted to respond to what Kemia said, and if there was any other stories, whatever you'd like to share.
Yeah. Um, one of the things that really stood out for me was how much we all impact each other and how frequently we don't even recognize the impact we're having on other people. I can't speak to the chief resident, but I'm going to imagine that he may never have given that interaction another thought. And for you, that same interaction was transformative. It was career changing, life changing, and gave you an opportunity to think about these experiences in a completely different way. And I loved how when as you were just kind of saying, one of the most powerful things that can help another person is a connection. And one of the things that can harm a person the most is a connection, right? And so that same interaction could have gone completely differently had number one, the chief resident not even stopped, right? Like had he just ignored you, kept walking, not recognized your presence, right? That would have had an impact in its own right, as would have there's no crying in medicine response, get over it, move on, like there's another patient, you have a new admission, like get to work, right? And so just recognizing how we impact people all day, every day in ways that we cannot even possibly imagine, it's a lot of responsibility. And it also is kind of uplifting in some ways to know how our connection with other people can create so much impact down the road if we choose for it to, right? And I think that that has been such a powerful piece of this work is, I didn't go into medicine to be this. And I don't have to be this, right? And I can choose to show up in a way where my impact is going to have the impact that I want it to have. Um, but all of that work begins with us, right? Like this is work that starts here. It's not work that has to be, I mean, it is work that can be done by our systems and our organizations and our hospitals and at higher levels. And it's work that we also need to engage with ourselves because we are, a critical piece in this paradigm.
Well,
Yeah.
that's so important. I'll let you speak in just a second. Yeah, I wanted to say, like, as we wind down, thank you so much. And I'm sure when doctors listen to this, it's going to trigger like their own memories and possibly some of their own traumas. And even for me, while I was saying this, I was thinking while I was on the ambulance corps, once I had to go to the call of a young dad. And we didn't save him, and it turns out I think he had an aortic aneurysm, and we couldn't have. But his daughter, I've never really said this out loud. His daughter was in chorus with me. So I was in high school. And so I knew who she was. And I never ever said a word. But every time I looked at her, I was like, I was there, in my own brain. We did everything we could to save your dad. I'm so sorry. I was 16 years old. And so anyway, so just I feel like the things that you've shared today are so powerful and important for physicians. So thank you so much. And as we wind down these last couple minutes, Kemia, any final few words for physicians and if they would like to reach out to you and how they can get in touch.
Thank you. Michael, I felt like you said something that was so important there because we talk about this, this is, inside out work. And I love the fact that you also acknowledge the fact that the systems are harmful, right? The systems in which we are trying to do this work are harmful. And so I don't want to leave any listener with the impression that we are suggesting that you can mindset bootstraps your way out of a toxic, harmful, demoralizing, however you want to frame it up, environment. What I think the hope that we want to leave is that many, 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 if not most of us have been there, have and are willing to be present, to presence with you as you figure out your next steps, whatever those might be. So that we are not alone. You are not alone. The number of times that we have heard the phrase, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one who couldn't cut it. I thought I was the only one feeling this way. I thought I was the only one who was broken. I thought I was the only one. And to sit with someone else who has done and been and seen and experienced, even not exactly, but enough to say yes. And I know what that feels like is really, really powerful. And also we need to work to fix the system. And I do not have enough power. I'm a little teeny tiny speck. I don't have the power. Michael, you don't have the power. Kim, you don't have the power. We collectively, right, need to begin to exercise and flexing capacity building power. Because we have lost sight of, and those of us who are in a more resourced position in our lives at this stage, meaning we're old, have a greater responsibility to make it easier for the physicians that are coming in because they have less power than we do. because they are less resourced oftentimes than we are. They're carrying student loan debt. They're trying to catch up on the 15 or 20 years that they spent doing other things and delaying building wealth, building families, buying homes, getting things started. Our responsibility is to recognize and flex our power, our privilege, and to recognize that while we may have ceded power in how medicine is practiced in this country because we just wanted to practice medicine, we didn't want to do the business. It is time that we recognize the things that are increasing harm and we start to say no to those things.
Mhm.
When we recognize the things that are stripping physicians of autonomy and voice in how they care for patients and say no to those things. And there are more of us out here trying to do that than I think we realize, we recognize. And so find each other for that purpose as well. Because what is happening isn't just hurting doctors. It's hurting everyone that doctors take care of.
Mhm.
It's hurting healthcare teams. Right? And it is our responsibility to heal the system if we want to continue to heal our patients.
Mhm. Absolutely. And as you said, you're never ever alone. There's people there that want out there that want to help, a lot of them, and any of us can connect you with them. So thank you so much. And I always say, I repeat Kathy Steppian's words, everyone wins when physicians are well. And as we close this down, Michael, in like 30 seconds or less, do you have any parting words for our audience?
No, I think this has been such an incredibly important conversation. And, skepticism is normal. That's okay. You don't have to be all in on everything that we talked about. And giving yourself an opportunity to be curious and explore and think and process and learn um, changed the trajectory of my entire life. So skepticism is good, and we can all learn from the things that we're really digging our heels into.
For sure. So thank you so much. And I'll put your contact information in the show notes. And as I always end, I say in closing, to move the needle in healthcare, we all need to raise our voices and we all need to care about each other. We already know that doctors need to care about patients. Patients need to care about doctors too. So stand up, doctors, and let's stand up for doctors.